And as we are celebrating the 46th anniversary of the 6th of October 1973 war, now we are located in the Air Force Museum in Cairo. We met a regular visitor, Dr. Bassem al-Shamma, who is the very famous Egyptologist and historian, and no one better to actually talk about and brief us on the recent and the ancient history of the Egyptian army. Dr. Shamma, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me in this amazingly beautiful place.
Yes, it is definitely. Dr. Shamma, this is the Air Force Museum, but we want to take a few steps back. We want to talk about the Egyptian army in general. Shed more light on the ancient Egyptian army. We know it was very famous. We know it was famous for its victories, for how big it was. But can you give us more of a detailed insight on it?
Like the ancient Egyptian civilization,
yes.
And like any of the beautiful inventions that we always study, done by the hands of those amazing Egyptians, the army and the disciplined soldier who would join or be recruited as the first recruiting system which was followed in ancient Egypt. There was a title in the ancient Egyptian army called the scribe soldier. And the scribe soldier would go to the villages and to the beautiful cities of Egypt, and he would choose and write the names because he is the scribe. And that will be considered recruitment. And you would be very lucky if you are a young Egyptian or a young ancient Egyptian to be recruited in the ancient Egyptian army because of many reasons. One, because of the disciplined life. Two, because you will be also given a beautiful piece of land by the government. We all know that the ancient Egyptian invented the idea of the centralized government with viziers,
yes.
meaning ministers today. And there will be this business of you are going to be defending your land and your land at the same time, because you were given a piece of land to be of your own. The very famous Egyptologist Shulman has studied more than 60 ranks in the ancient Egyptian army, which gives you an idea how disciplined, how the administration of the army was, how the division of the army into platoons. We know from Ramesses II in his famous battle of Qadesh against the Hittites in Syria, how his platoons were given names. And the platoons were given names in form of deities. So you hear about Ptah, you hear about Ra, you hear about Iman, we call him Amun today. And you will notice that those were the names of the platoons, and how small groups will be diverging from those platoons for certain functions and certain missions. Some of which in the Egyptian army history was very close to Mission Impossible. Like, for example, the battle that I considered the twin battle of the 6th of October, 10th of Ramadan battle, as I always call it, the twin battle, the Battle of Megiddo. To those who know Megiddo, they will know what I'm talking about. To those who do not know Megiddo or did not read about it, they will be very amazed to know that the ancient Egyptian army was to defeat an army in Asia in the famous place of Megiddo, a very tough place to deal with. I'm talking from the geological point of view and from the military point of view. Why? Because the Egyptian army was facing 330, that's documented in ancient Egypt, 330 emirs, 330 princes, who every one of which is bringing his own group of soldiers in a, if you'd like, a confederation, a unified army led by the Prince of Qadesh. So imagine with me, and all our viewers will imagine with me, the Prince of Qadesh, who his name and his title on his own is a very strong title, leading 330 emirs, 330 princes, every one of which is bringing his own group of soldiers.
Well, Dr. Shamma, now you've said that there were 60 ranks, many different organizations and many different platoons within the army. How did the Egyptian army get to that sort of organization? Because it does sound pretty advanced to that time. So how did we actually get advanced to reach that level of organization and strategic planning, if we may call it? At the same time, it was pretty ancient. I mean, we're talking about prehistoric times. So how did we get that? Were we influenced by other cultures, other militaries from other countries, other empires?
Well said. This is a very interesting question, because you will notice when you read history, and especially the prehistoric history, or the before the dynastic era, if you like, the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, you will notice, for example, that the very famous incident of unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, that was a military leader who led an army from the south to defeat the north, and then he depicts the captives of wars who looked very, very away from the Egyptian features. The facial features were very non-Egyptian.
Yes.
So we thought maybe they were foreigners who were living in the delta. This is a proposition in history. So we are talking about a battle, strategic planning that you mentioned. 3,200 years BC,
yes.
Over 5,000 years of history. There is a group of soldiers led by a leader, a military leader, who then became the king of Upper and Lower Egypt for the first time, wearing the double crown, as we all know, the red and the white. But even more interesting, you will notice that battles took place even before the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. The Upper and Lower Egyptian unification did not happen overnight. It was not like Narmer would come and wake up, let's go, let's conquer the north, unified, done. It was not like that, of course. In history, we have many things in form of steps. You will notice before that, the world were in tribal wars, and after that as well. But in Egypt, it was, as you said, very, very advanced way of military tactics, to the point that everybody will be amazed to tell you that there is a battle, once again, the Megiddo battle, was used by the enemies 3,400 years after it was achieved. The great victory of Juhitmes III, called Thutmoses III, with his amazing disciplined Egyptian army. And here comes, after 3,400 years, Allenby of the enemy, called Elimbi in our colloquialism. Allenby used it against the Turks in 1918. 1918.
Yes.
1918 AD is using a plan which took place, we're talking Thutmoses III, 1400s BC, almost over 3,000 years of history.
Yes.
That gives you what? That gives you not only military tactic, but it is still visible, it's still done, it is still used by people, it's still studied by people. So military action took place 1,000 years ago, and it is followed by people afterwards. Bear in mind, 1918, what kind of weaponry you are using, and 34 or more hundred years of age, what sorts of military tactics.
Well, talking about weaponry, was the Egyptian army at that time, during the pharaonic era, was it known for having a certain a specialization or a stronger sort of weaponry? Were they stronger, the horsemen, the carriages, were they the foot soldiers, the soldiers on the ground, were they the biggest sort of threat? How was it assessed?
Without exaggeration, I can tell you easily that the Egyptian army, when it was in the ancient Egyptian army, when it was faced by foreign, unknown weaponry, if it was in the form, in one case, of the horse, as you well mentioned, in the case of the Hika Khasut, that we call them Hyksos, those people who came as Indo-European tribes, the Indo-European tribes were, what is this animal that runs so fast?
Yes.
To the Egyptians, they didn't know the horse. To the Egyptians, they didn't know the wheel. So the chariot wheel and the horse, entered by the Hyksos, were very equal to today's nuclear weapons. This is no exaggeration. And the Hyksos were tough people. Those are people who ruled northern Egypt for 108 years. We are not talking about a tribe with no administrative way of life, living in caves. We're looking at people who ruled a very strong kingdom, the Egyptian kingdom, for all those years, which means they were strong. So to get rid of them using the same weaponry, I think that's genius, because what happened is that the ancient Egyptian soldier, as he did in the 6th of October, once again, this twin thing that's happening in history repeats itself. Positively, in our case here, they studied the chariot of the Hikakasut, of the Hyksos, and they captured and they lightened it, so they made it lighter in weight, so it became faster. Because in ancient times like today, fast equals victory.
Yes.
Your speed is a huge percentage of your victory. Once again, the tricky way of dealing with the battle. So now you have the weapons, now you have tamed the horse, now you are having a faster and a lighter chariot than the enemy. That led to the attempts. You asked, how did we reach? Of course, you didn't reach an overnight. That was training, that was studying the enemy, studying its weaponry, advancing yourself.
Yes.
There were a great deal of martyrs involved also in the battles. We have Siqnin Rata'a, the king of Egypt. He lost his life during one of the battles against the Hyksos, to the point that when I was going through an English written book about Egyptology, I read this amazing description of this non-Egyptian Egyptologist or historian writing a book about Egypt, calling Siqnin Rata'a, and this amazing Egyptian king who lost his life in one of the battles against the enemy, the martyr. And I was amazed.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Shamma mentioned, talking about speed, talking about specialized weaponry, that means victory, we are sitting right here, right now, in the Air Force Museum, where actually in the museum you have a great wall inside that actually depicts the history of the Air Force in the Egyptian Army. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
Here, as you can see, we have the wall that tells the history of the aviation. It was proven that the ancient Egyptians were the first one to know the science of aviation when they found out a modern model of a pad dated in a tomb dated back to 200 years before Christ. After that, we have the first European attempt to fly were done by Abbas ibn Farnaz, the Andalusian scientist. In 1500, they found out the portrayals that were drawn by Leonardo da Vinci for a fluttering wings. After that, we have famous Wright brothers who actually made the first fly in 1903. In 1909, the French Louis Blériot were the first human being to fly over the Manche, English Canal. 1915, the first German plane actually made of metal, which participated in the First World War. 1927, the Lockheed Vega, the American plane, made the first Atlantic flight. After that, in 1939, was the first plane with a jet engine called Heinkel. It was a German.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen, talking to the regular visitor to the Air Force Museum, our very own Dr. Bassam al-Shamma, the famous Egyptologist and historian. Dr. Shamma, now let's go fast forward for a bit, leaving the Pharaonic era. Now we want to take an overview of the development and the progression of the Egyptian army up until the 1973 war. So, was the Egyptian army always the biggest in North Africa, the biggest in Africa, the strongest? How was it like during these phases of the French occupation here, the English occupation, leading up to the 1967 war, leading up to the 1973 war? What was the progression of the Egyptian army looking like during these times?
You have to bear in mind, when we go through an assessment of the Egyptian army through its phases of history, You have also to bear in mind a very important factor, which is weaponry. You mentioned weaponry in the first part.
Yes.
And you mentioned, is this a factor? What if a soldier is attacking me with an iron sword? And your swords are made out of copper, for example. Or you are still using wooden arrows or the sword. Is this going to be in my favor? So all through the history, Egyptian soldiers are progressing. You can see it. You can see how bronze, when it was introduced, that's a revolution.
Yes.
In the history of weaponry, iron, the same thing. You are fighting the Hittites. Hittites comes from the area that you would like to call nowadays northern Syria, Anatolia, places like that. This is a very advanced weaponry place.
Yes.
How to learn more, how to educate yourself, that's what the Egyptian soldier did through his phases. And in many cases, we keep a guy like me who's writing and reading history for the last 38 years, if you like. I'm still amazed at battles like, for example, the military council which Thutmose III gathered. Military council, over 3,000 years of history. When you think like the king is going to give his decision and that's it, no. The leaders are with him, the leaders of the platoons are with him, and documented what the king himself is telling us, how he proposed an amazing idea. And for the people who know Megiddo, it's a very tough geological area to reach. You have two ways. One unpaved, and no way a military army can go through. No way, because of its bumps and ups and downs. No way. It's impossible. And the other one is the paved road, or the path, which the Megiddo people are expecting you to come from. So while the leaders propose this, here comes Sadat, but over 3,000 years of history, and gives this decision that the people will say, this is a decision.
It's quite a bold one.
Exactly, quite bold one. Well said. And are you taking the responsibility for that? Yes, I am sure of my soldier. I'm sure of my abilities of my soldiers and my army. And he said, we are going to take the unpaved road. And that will surprise the army. Unpaved road means your army can reach half of it, can reach to Megiddo quarter of the number, and the rest will be if dead or if injured or if. Or the chariots, if you like, something would happen to the chariots, will be broken, will be. And he did, and it worked, and it surprised the Megiddo people to the point that the history texts are telling us that they were throwing themselves from the Megiddo walls. They would prefer to commit suicide, the enemy soldiers, than to face the Egyptian soldier.
Well, talking about the surprise element, now we're celebrating 46 years for the 1973 war. It is a well-documented fact the surprise element was a big factor in winning this war. Sure. And it started off with the Air Force making the first wave of attack. Now, that changed the science of warfare in modern history. True. And many things and many military strategies and planning was influenced by such an attack and such a maneuver by the Egyptian military, especially the Air Force. How did that come about? What was so different that was influential about the Air Force and its attack to influence the other Western military and the international military strategies?
I learned a sentence from a gentleman authority in our beautiful museum here. And I'm going to quote it, answering your question. It is the human element. Because if you look at the weapons in 1973 and who was with the other side, and you would think, well, that can give maybe a favor on the other side. And then you look at how the great defeat that the enemy met, especially with the surprise of the first airstrike and the Air Force airstrike. And if you look at the 14th of October air battle, the Air Force battle, which became later on the festival and the feast of the Air Force in our military. One of the most amazing air fights in Mansoura. Again, once again, the human element worked in our favor. This will remind you, going back to your question about how the Egyptian army all through its history went in stages. For example, take Ain Galut, which is not far away from Megiddo, but far away in time, not far away in distance, if you like, in Asia. And you will notice how at the beginning, when the army led by Qutuz, as you all remember, and before Qutuz, Bibers was sent to see what's happening with the Tatarians, with the Mongols, and all of a sudden, the shaking at the beginning, and then the scream of Qutuz, wa Islama, wa Islama, wa Islama, 3 times, and the famous scream, and that changed a very huge scream coming from the heart of the leader of the army, wanting to win the battle, leading the Egyptian army once again outside to protect not only Egypt, by the way, because I say Ain Galut battle, just like the 6th of October, unlike Megiddo, unlike Qadisiyah, and like all the other amazing victories that was led by Islamic or Egyptian army, you will notice something very interesting. You will notice that it is not only changing the history of military, but it's also changing geography, amazingly enough. Fathom the idea that the Mongols went on, or the Tatarians went on after Ain Galut. They would go directly to Europe, and Europe has got to pay homage and thanks to the Egyptian army for that.
Dr. Shammah, because we're running out of time, one final question. Being a regular visitor in the Air Force Museum, how do you find it? How do you rate it? You've been to museums all around the world. How do you rate this museum that you visit so much?
I love this museum. I came more than once. I think museology is very, very obvious in the inside and the outside. The signs of not only that you are visiting the museum to see things or to learn things, but also to share, also to do the activities. Experience it. Children will be very happy. Every age will be very happy. I am so proud of this place to the point that when I'm talking about it, because I'm well known that if I see a small bit in this museum or that museum, I always criticize, and you all know this about me.
Definitely.
This is a place which is action, it is interesting, it is learning, it is museology, it is clean, and the guides are amateur guide. The guides are amazingly educated, very excited, very interesting, and that also turns to the people who are attending. I say to everybody, please do come and visit it, not only once and more. Schools, bring your students here, universities, everybody must visit this museum.
Ladies and gentlemen, definitely it is a privilege to be shooting and being here at the Air Force Museum, and it's also a pleasure to have with us Dr. Bassem Shammah, the famous historian and Egyptologist. Dr. Shammah, it was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We'll be right back for more on this special edition celebrating the 46th anniversary of the 1973 October War victory.